The Time Lords of Atlantis. Who are they? Well, they are Saturn Cronus and King Janus of Italy. In the writings of Macrobius, who was a Roman scholar, he wrote the Saturnalia, and it reveals how the calendar system was created. And it is based on, obviously, the cycles of the earth and integrated with the symbolism and stories of the Cronides. December belongs to Cronus, and that is when Saturnalia is celebrated or was celebrated. And January belongs to King Janus. He's a door opener. That is why he's shown with two faces to see behind and ahead of him. The two of them created a partnership and expanded the Cronide kingdoms and queendoms. And he co-ruled, King Janus co-ruled with Cronus in Italy. So I'm going to get to some of this and read it, but the zodiac is based on where the sun rises, in what star system. I believe it was the vernal equinox, and they integrated the stories of all of these Cronide gods and goddesses into that zodiac, and the Romans and Greeks, had the same thing. The Egyptians had a slight difference in their symbolism of their zodiac, but it's all the same concept. Okay, so let me find an area here out of Macrobius that is good to read. Okay, out of Macrobius's Saturnalia, books 1 through 2, page 71. In the cult you pay Saturn, he said, whom you style the foremost of the gods. Your practice differs from the Egyptians, a nation of most profound religious scruple, for they had received neither Saturn nor Serapis himself into their temples, holy of holies, all the way down to the death of Alexander of Macedon. After that, under the pressure of the Ptolemies' tyranny, they were forced to receive these gods too, following the custom of the Alexandrians, who paid them special cult. Still, they obeyed the command in such a way as to avoid overturning entirely their own religious observances, because the Egyptians were never permitted to appease their gods using animals or blood, but only with prayers and incense. Whereas victims had to be sacrificed to these two newcomers in the customary way, their shrines were located beyond the sacred boundaries of the cities, so that the gods could receive their usual cult of blood sacrifice. Yet the city temples would not be polluted by the death of animals. Hence, no town of Egypt received a shrine of either Saturn or Serapis within its walls. I gather that you have received the latter of these hardly at all, whereas you celebrate Saturn with the greatest honor among all the others. If then there is nothing that I would be forbidden to learn, I would like you to make it known. Here Avenius redirected the expected Horus to Praetextatus, saying, though all present share the same potent learning, Vedius is nonetheless singularly well informed about all religious rites, and can reveal to you both the origin of the cult that has paid this god and the rationale behind the customary observance. Though Praetextatus tried to put the task off onto others, they all prevailed upon him to give the account himself. When they were silent, then, he began as follows. It is permissible for me to reveal the great origin of the Saturnalia, not the origin that touches on the secret nature of the divinity, but the one that is spoken of with an admixture of legendary elements, or is revealed to all and sundry by the physical scientists. Telling the secret account that flows from the pure sounds of truth is forbidden even in the very midst of the rites. And if someone learns them, he is commanded to keep them hidden within his heart. Accordingly, our friend Horace will be allowed to review with me the things that may be known. The region now called Italy was ruled by Janus, who, as Hyginus reports, following Protarchus of Tralles, held the land together with Chamisus, another native, in a power-sharing arrangement whereby the region was called Chamisine. The settlement, Janaculum, this arrangement was later reduced to the sole rule of Janus, who is held to have had two faces so that he could see what was in front of him and what was behind. Something surely to be explained with reference to the shrewdness and cleverness appropriate to a king, who ought to know the past and foresee the future. Compare Antiforta and Postforta, whom the Romans worship as very fitting companions of divination. When Saturn arrived by ship, he was received hospitably by Janus and taught him agriculture. And when Janus improved his way of life, which had been wild and uncouth before the fruits of the earth were discovered, he rewarded Saturn by making him a partner in his rule. When Janus became the first to coin money, he maintained his respect for Saturn in this too. Because Saturn had arrived by ship, he had the likeness of his own head stamped on one side of the coin, a ship on the other, to preserve the memory of Saturn for posterity. We know that the bronze was stamped that way from the gambling game, in which boys throw denarii high in the air and shout heads or ships, bearing witness to antiquity thereby. We know that Janus and Saturn ruled together in harmony and collaborated in founding neighboring settlements. From Maro, who reports this settlement named was Janaculum, that one Saturnia. And it's also obvious from the fact that later generations dedicated two neighboring months to them, so that December has the festival of Saturn, while January has the other's name. When Saturn suddenly disappeared in the middle of their reign, Janus devised a way to increase his honors. First, he named his entire kingdom Saturnia. Then he established an altar, as though for a god, and sacred rites that he called the Saturnalia. By so many centuries do these rites antedate the city of Rome. He accordingly commanded that Saturn be received with the solemn grandeur of religious scruple as the source of a better way of life, a status indicated by the image to which Janus added a sickle, the symbol of the harvest. To Saturn, people attribute the practice of grafting shoots, cultivating fruit trees, and methodically raising all produce of every conceivable kind. The people of Cyrene, when they sacrificed to him, even wear garlands of fresh figs and send each other honey cakes, believing that he discovered honey and fruit. The Romans also call him Sterculius, becoming the first fertilized fields for manure. The time of his reign is said to have been the happiest, both because of its material abundance and also because the distinction between slavery and freedom did not yet exist, as it made plain by the fact that slaves are allowed complete license during the Saturnalia. Okay, so you just got some information here on where a couple of the months come from. And Saturnalia was usually celebrated more like December 14th through 16th, somewhere in that area, like a good solid week and a half before December 25th, but it's close. Now, in the Saturnalia by Macrobius, he talks a little bit more about time. And I'm going to skip ahead to page 89 and read a little bit more. Okay, Macrobius wrote, furthermore, Cronus equals Saturn is the same as Cronus equal time. For as much as the mythographers offer different versions of Saturn in their tales, the physical scientists restore him to a certain likeness to the truth. They say that he cut off the genitals of his father, Heaven, and then when these were cast into the sea, Venus was engendered, taking the name Aphrodite from the foam from which she was formed. They interpret this to mean that when chaos existed, time did not, since time is a fixed measurement computed from the rotation of the heavens. Hence, Cronus, who, as I said, is Cronus, is thought to have been born from heaven itself, because the seeds for engendering all things after heaven flowed down from heaven, and because all the elements that filled the world took their start from those seeds. When the world was complete in all parts and members, the process of bringing forth seeds from heaven for the creation of the elements came to an end at a fixed moment in time, since a full complement of elements had by then been created. Okay, so we're going to continue on a little bit. Because of the story of castration, too, our countrymen called him Saturn, after the Greek word sathe, which denotes the penis, Saturn, as it were, just as they also think satires are called, as it were, satires, because they are given to lust. Some judge that the sickle was attributed to him because time crops, cuts off, and severs all things. They say that he was accustomed to swallowing his sons and then vomiting them back up. This also signifies that he is time, which by turns creates and destroys all things and then gives birth to them again. As for the story that he was driven out by his son, what does that mean? But that as time grows old, they are pushed aside by those that come next. He is bound, however, because one moment is tied to the next by the fixed laws of nature, or because all the fruits of the earth are produced in a rotation, organized, as it were, by firmly knotted bonds. Legend has it, too, that the sickle fell into Sicily because the land is supremely fertile. I've recalled now that Janus ruled with Saturn, and that the mythographers and physical scientists have to say about the latter. Now I'll present what both groups claim about Janus. The mythographers report that under Janus's rule, everyone's homes were well fortified by an aura of holiness and religious scruple. For that reason, it was decreed that he be worshipped as a god, and because of his benefactions, the entrances and exits of buildings were consecrated to him. Zenon, too, in the first book of his Italica, relates that Janus was the first to build temples to the gods in Italy and to establish sacred rites, and for that reason he earned the right always to be named first when rituals are performed. Some think that he is said to have had two faces because he both knew past events and foresaw the future. Okay, I'm going to stop. Now, in this Saturnalia by Macrobius, he continues on and talks about all the months and the symbolisms and how it relates to nature. Another interesting thing he wrote, real quick, is he says, hence, too, when the Phoenicians fashioned his likeness for their rites, they represented him as a serpent shaped like a circle, swallowing its own tail, to make plain that the universe is fed by itself alone and moves in a self contained circle. That was referring to Janus. So it goes into, basically how all the months got their name. The Caesars had some involvement in it. It goes a lot to the gods, you know, and some of these Caesars. You could read this further if you're more interested in a lot of the detail. But I just wanted to touch on this briefly to show you that the people of this past, which my estimate's 15,000 to 19,000 years ago, were very well aware of the planetary cycles and the star systems, and it was very much developed by these Cronides. And another interesting thing in Macrobius, it just talks about the all-seeing eye. This is another statement that makes plain what we should think about the sun and Jupiter, the eye of Zeus that sees all and apprehends all, and again, and the sun, you who watch over all and overhear all. And I'm going to stop for a minute. I've told you in my research, there's three instances of the eye I've found. Dionysus is described with the all-seeing eye, or an eye that sees everything. Zeus and Hera. So there you have it. All of this is in Macrobius' Saturnalia. You could pick that up. I want to talk a little bit further about not just the cycles, because every year everything repeats and the calendar pretty much stays the same, but I want to talk about the years. And the year that we're in, as I make this 2015, has been dictated to us by the Romans. And it has to do with the birth date and rule of the last pharaoh, Caesarion. And every time these pharaohs came in, they changed the dates. And we're basically on time related to the last pharaoh, Caesarion, of ancient Egypt. That's where we're counting from. Now, I have some different theories on who this Jesus Christ is. Now, there's no year zero. 1 BC to 1 AD is what they do. But I tend to think he was some sort of pharaonic bloodline. Could have even been Caesarion himself. We don't know. But that's where the year right now that we're in. And the Jews, I think the earth, or the calendar system to them is like 6,015, something like that. I'd have to look into it further. That's their year. And that, where does that go back to? When they were, what, in ancient, Babylon, coming out of there? Is that what that goes to? So, and then the Chinese have their own calendar system. But it just, this is where this stuff comes from. It comes from these Cronides. And we are still on their time. They control it. They are the Time Lords, and their priests control it. And our years, 2015, based off the last pharaoh, Caesarion. So they plug in significant dates that relate to something important to these bloodlines. That's something to keep in mind, or their religious rites. you know. Okay, so basically that's it on the Time Lords of Atlantis. And as I've said before, Theodorus Siculus referred to these Cronides and their relatives as Atlantians. So, and they did, in some of my other videos, I believe there was an Atlantis, and that was given to Poseidon to rule, and probably went on, a civilization there for thousands of years until a volcano blew it up, and then it sunk probably around 12,000 years ago. That was the end of that. But yeah, they were called the Atlanteans, and they basically went all over and brought their time system, their agriculture. Unfortunately, one side of the family brought their little sacrifices, which just wasn't animals, and graduated into this cannibalism nonsense. And the other side, as I read, um, tried to get rid of that. In Egypt, there was no blood sacrifice allowed. It was prayer and incense, and that was it. They didn't, they didn't want those cults, those blood cults in Egypt. They tried to keep it out, and they did for a while, but it came back in again. So that's it. Macrobius' Saturnalia and the Time Lords of Atlantis.